So there's a few more things that I want to say about the fungi. So we've got the benefits of fungi, and then we've got the not so good or the downside of fungi, right? So fungi are beneficial to humans, right? So this whole concept of antibiotics was actually something that we first witnessed in fungi, and many of the antibiotics that we get come from fungi. So penicillin was one of the first antibiotics, and it is produced by a fungus. There's also different vitamins and foods and food flavoring that we get from fungi. So we use fungi to develop a lot of different types of cheeses, and even some processed meats, and different things are, they're kind of in our food besides just eating mushrooms. So they can be used for producing a lot of different types of flavorings for our foods. Now, not all fungi, though, are good for us. So, as it says, the cell walls produce substances that can trigger allergies. So, sometimes that can be an issue. And also, we refer to a fungal infection as a mycosis. So mycoses are generally chronic infections because fungi grow very slowly. And the drugs that affect fungal cells may also affect animals, which includes us. So this fact makes fungal infections often very difficult to treat. Okay. Some fungi are what we call dimorphic. So di referring to two and morph referring to morphology or the body shape of the organism, what it looks like. So some fungi can have two different growth forms. So we might see a yeast, which remember is single-celled and microscopic. So if it's invaded an organism like a human, at the human host's body temperature, it might be a yeast, but in a different environment at a lower temperature, we might see it growing more as a mold, which has more of a filamentous body pattern. So dimorphic refers to having those two different shapes. It could be the single-celled, or it could be more of the multicellular filament. So fungal-related diseases. So many different genera of fungi can be inhaled as spores, and that can produce an infection in the lungs. So usually those who are immunocompromised tend to suffer from fungal infections, while healthy individuals are not typically affected by spores, with the exception of maybe some allergies. So that's why we see individuals such as AIDS patients can be severely impacted by a fungal infection, right? So as it says, harmless spores can cause what we call an opportunistic infection because their immune system, AIDS patients, their immune systems are not healthy at all. They're not able to fight off other organisms, and therefore a fungal infection can be pretty devastating for them. Then there's also the dermatophytes. So these are fungi that infect the epidermis, such as your hair and your nails. So dermatophytes usually secrete an enzyme that degrades keratin, which is the protein that's found in your hair and your skin and your nails. So it can be anything from, as we said, kind of a devastating fungal infection of the lungs to having fungus that has discolored your nails, your fingernails, or your toenails. All right, let's move on to the protozoa. So protozoa are unicellular eukaryotic organisms. Among the protozoa are many variations on cell structures, and protozoans a lot of times can inhabit water and the soil. So As it says, a few species are pathogens that are responsible for hundreds of millions of infections each year. So a lot of times we like to think of bacteria as being kind of the main culprit, but there's a lot of different protozoans out there that can definitely cause harm. All right, so as it says, single celled, no cell wall once again, and these are not your photosynthetic protists. These are your more animal-like protists, which is why we call them the protozoa. Now, the feeding and growing stage is what we call the trophozoite. All right, so a lot of these protozoa have very complex life cycles, and they require different hosts during their life cycles. So the feeding and the growing stage is what's called the trophozoite, and a lot of times it's feeding off of bacteria or other small particulates. And then it may go into a dormant stage, which is the cyst. And the cyst allows the organism to kind of survive when food and moisture or oxygen are lacking, or when temperatures are not suitable, or maybe when there's toxic chemicals that are present. The cyst also enables kind of these parasitic protozoans to survive outside of the host as well. And that's important because parasitic protozoa typically have to be excreted from one host in order to get to a new host. So being in a cyst form allows them to kind of reach a new host, right? So as it says, an important factor in the spread of disease. So protozoans are typically grouped by how they move about. So we have the amoeba, and we'll see if I can... Nope. All right, sorry about that. I needed to pause so I could expand this so I can show you the amoeba video here. Let's see if it'll work. There we go. All right, so we're looking at an amoeba, which is a single-celled organism. And what you're looking at here are the pseudopodia. All right, so all these are pseudopodia, which are called false feet. These are extensions of the cell membrane, right? So it's just pushing the cell membrane outward. The cytoplasm is pushing the cell membrane outward to move it forward. So keep in mind these no cell wall, all right? And they just move kind of by flowing along. All right, so those are amorphic, meaning they do not have any particular shape. No, it lacks morphology in a sense, is kind of what that translates into. And they have the pseudopodia or the false feet, which are extensions of the cytoplasm. Other protozoans, so these guys are classified by their pseudopodia, how they move about. Others are classified by cilia. So we have the ciliates, which move because of the cilia that they have. So here we see a paramecia. It's covered in those short, tiny little hairs, which are the cilia. So you can't just see the ones that are over top. It just depends upon which hairs are in focus. And so every once in a while you'll see some kind of come in and come out of focus. But this is how these protozoa move about, is through their cilia. Okay. All right, next up we have the flagellates. So once again, talking about flagella. Whoops, no video, sorry about that. Just hoping to be able to show you that. Let's go back up. All right, so you saw that though in the earlier or the last little segment where we were talking about how the eukaryotic flagella differs from the prokaryotic flagella. So long whip-like structures that are used for movement. So I have here an example of Trichomonas or Trichomonas vaginalis. Is a protozoan that infects humans and causes trichomoniasis, and it has flagella. Then we also have groups that are called apicomplexans or sporozoa, and as it says, they have a structure to help pierce the host cell. and that's why they're called apicomplex. An apical complex is what helps to pierce the host cell. And so Plasmodium is the protozoan that falls into this group, and that is the one that is responsible for malaria. All right, so let's do a concept check here. So it says the active, feeding, and motile stage of the protozoan life cycle is the blank stage. The active, feeding, and motile, the one that moves about and it's active, it's feeding. Is it the cyst? Nope. Remember, the cyst enables it to resist harsh environmental conditions. It kind of hunkers down until it finds something, a good environment, and then it will kind of start to germinate again and become active. Endospore. Endospores are what we find inside of bacteria, right? So that was a way bacteria survive harsh environmental conditions. And bacteria can actually survive harsher conditions than protozoans can. The cyst is not quite as resistant as an endospore. Then we got trophozoite, and that is correct. So trophozoite is our feeding stage, our active stage to our protozoans.